Welcome back, everyone, to the Fanciest Man of Cornwood's YouTube channel, and today we have our part 2 of our Commander tier list rankings here for the commanders from Duskmourn as well as its commander set. And last time we talked about kind of the different tier levels, how I looked at ranking these commanders, what it took to kind of reach those powerful tiers, the S and A tier, and then what made commanders maybe held back a little bit, put into the B and C tier. We haven't had any F tier commanders yet, but we are going to go ahead and look at the rest of the commanders from the set here. And we'll go ahead and jump right in with the Mind Skinner. This is a legendary enchantment creature nightmare for 3 blue. The Mind Skinner can't be blocked. If a source you control would deal damage to an opponent, prevent that damage, and each opponent mills that many cards. And this is a 10-1. So first of all, just a huge flavor win and just uniqueness win for this card. I love the way that this ability interacts with blue. It's got obviously all of the mill tools that you could possibly want are in blue, but also it has a lot of unblockable creatures and creatures that have cool effects when they get through for combat damage and things like that. It is a little bit of a shame that this replacement effects turns off those combat effect triggers for those blue creatures, but I think you have enough of a selection of creatures that are just straight up unblockable. You have a lot of flying creatures that provides you with that evasion as well. And the fact you just have to find one opponent to hit, and you can mill each opponent for that for that damage rather than dealing the combat damage itself. I think the Mind Skinner is obviously going to be one of the popular commanders to kind of try out. I don't know that the power is there as much as people would like. It can mill 40 cards every time it hits. That's huge, but we do have that really kind of delicate body with the 1 toughness. It doesn't have any sort of hexproof or ward or anything like that would protect it from board wipes or damage to all creatures on the board, anything like that. Blue does have the counterspell backup. It's got a lot of ways to protect things at instant speed, so that's nice. But I think if you're looking at a mill commander, this is something new. It's something different. It could certainly be a fun way to take it, but it's not as powerful as some of the commanders that aren't as reliant to stay on the field to keep their effect going. There's Bruvac, who really just helps the mill move along and kind of speeds it up. But yeah, as a 99 card or just as a commander that you want to have fun with and kind of see how far you can push this version of mill, the Mind Skinner is really fun. And if you are paying attention to the channel, there's definitely a chance that we'll do a dive and do a commander deck tech on this commander, because there's just so much potential there for building something really fun and cool. So we're going to move on to our next commander. That is the Swarm Weaver for 2 generic, a black and a green. You get a legendary artifact creature, Scarecrow. It's a 2/3. When the Swarm Weaver enters, create 2 1/1 black and green insect creature tokens with flying. And then it has Delirium as long as there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard. Insects and spiders you control get +1/+1 and have Death Touch. So again, we see this Scarecrow creature type. This is one I haven't really seen hyped up too much, but I have seen some people saying this would be a good tribal commander for those insects and for spiders. Definitely for insects, this is one that would be just really synergistic because of all that self-mill. You could try to build in maybe some blink or some recursion. I think that it would be a little bit difficult to these colors, but if you want to look at kind of reanimation and maybe those cards in black that tend to reanimate smaller creatures or creatures with a lower mana cost, then that's definitely a theme you could look at. And I think it would be pretty fun. I don't know that spiders really need this card. There's just so many good spider commanders, and there's so many that we've gotten in the last few years. Shelob is always going to be a fun card to build around, and you can definitely go spiders with Shelob. And then there's Ishkadov. There's commanders that are also built as kind of tribal spider commanders. and I think the Swarm Weaver just doesn't rank up there with those guys. So not the strongest start to this group. It's definitely a solid card, and I could see, building that insect tribal deck, or even just building kind of a delirium deck where, this isn't your main driver for power. It's just a little added bonus once you get up to those 4 card types in the graveyard. So I'm going to put it next to Rindemaw here. It is certainly easier to build around than some of these other B commanders. It's in the right colors, so solid commander. I just don't think it quite cracks that A, or definitely not the S tier. Alright, next we're going to look at the Wandering Rescuer. For 3 generic and 2 white, this is a legendary creature, Human Samurai Noble. It's got Flash, Convoke, so your creatures can tap to help pay for it. It's got Double Strike, and other tap creatures you control have Hexproof, and she is a 3/4. I think that this is kind of one of those commanders where the sum of the parts is just not as impressive as others. Having 4 different lines of text is really neat. It is nice that she can be convoked. The Flash is a good utility to have. I don't know that it's as useful in the command zone because you won't really be surprising people. They can take into account that if they want to target something that you have tapped and you have your mana up, or you have enough creatures up to help cast her, then they might just forego that and go after a different target, or wait until they have a couple of pieces of removal to kind of counter that at instant speed. So yeah, I don't think she's a bad card for the 99. I think she'll fit in a lot of aggressive decks where that instant speed hexproof definitely can come into play and help protect a big creature, or maybe a key piece of your human tribal deck or something like that. But I do think as a commander she is pretty underwhelming. So probably the strongest out of those C-level commanders that we have looked at so far, but yeah, I don't think she really cracks, B tier, or certainly not the higher levels of power we're looking at. All right, next we have another mono-white commander. This is Toby, Beastie Befriender. For 2 generic and a white, you get a legendary creature, Human Wizard. Toby is a 1/1, and when Toby enters, create a 4/4 white beast creature token. With this creature can't attack or block alone. As long as you control 4 or more creature tokens you control have flying. Alright, Toby is one I'm a bit torn on. I think that Toby's going to be undervalued a little bit, actually, just because of how straightforward the ability is, and kind of especially the deck build. I don't think this will be a difficult commander to build around at all. White makes lots of tokens. Giving those tokens flying is always useful. The token it makes having to attack or block alone, really not a big deal in white. You want to be aggressive. You're going to be making lots of tokens to try and get that second ability online, so it's really not much of a drawback. I wouldn't mind if, just like the Mind Skinner, if at least the toughness was a little bit higher. It's always scary when they're sitting at that 1 toughness, and you need that ability to stay on the field. I could see someone kind of taking this out at instant speed and putting all your creatures back on the ground. That's not a fun scenario as an attacker. So I do think Toby's solid though, and I actually would put Toby just right here at the end of the A tier, just because this is such an easy theme to build around for mono white. It's a good color to be doing a creature token theme. Almost any color can do that now, but mono white has a lot of access to get that second ability online quickly. You have a lot of cards that can make tokens at instant speed even, and make multiple tokens at a time. So yeah, I just think especially for a beginning commander player, this is actually a really strong option. And I've seen Toby discounted on a couple of other videos where they're talking about power tiers and things like that. I don't think he is above these other A tier commanders. I definitely don't think it's an S tier commander. But I think Toby's solid, and people are going to be a little surprised with all of the different ways that White has to get those tokens online quickly and then pump them with counters and things like that. I think people will be a little bit surprised at how well he can come out and play an aggressive style like those creature tokens. So, All right, moving on, we've got Tyvar the Pummeler for 1 generic and 2 green. This is a legendary creature, Elf Warrior. Tyvar is a 3/3. Tap another untapped creature you control. Tyvar gains indestructible until end of turn. Tap it. And then for 3 generic and 2 green, creatures you control get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. All right, so Tyvar has some major strengths. One of the big ones is that, we've seen these elf ball commanders before where you play mono green, you make tons and tons of mana. You can do that with elves. There's other ways in green to do that as well. And then you just pour that mana into that second ability. And Tyvar fits right into that. You can certainly, go elf tribal with him. You can put him, he's going to be great in the 99 of those elf ball decks that are kind of already established, and it'll just be another piece to have on the field and be able to throw your mana at to pump your whole board. I've seen some other people talk about it too, so this isn't my hot take, but the fact that Tyvar can pump your entire board of non-elves is pretty great in of itself. He's a really good mono green kind of go wide option because he protects himself. That overrun effect is going to pump the entire board, and mono green has no problem finding even just 1 or 2 creatures that have a high power to go ahead and pump the rest of your creatures and get in for big damage. So it's not a sorcery speed ability. You can do this in instant speed once blocks have been declared and things like that. So yeah, I think Tyvar, kind of like Toby, he's not getting as overlooked, but he's very solid and just a really easy commander to build around and put the right pieces around in green. So we're going to get to Tyvar out of F tier here. He's definitely not an F tier commander. I actually think he will go above a couple of these commanders in A tier just because of the ease of putting that deck together, and the fact that he pumps every creature, not just the elves that are on your board. So that's where I'm going to put Tyvar. Let's go ahead and move on. We'll look at Valgavoth, Harrower of Souls, for 2 generic, a black and a red. This is a legendary creature, Elder Demon. It's a 4/4 with flying, ward, pay 2 life, and whenever an opponent loses life for the first time during each of their turns, put a +1/+1 counter on Valgavoth, Harrower of Souls, and draw a card. Okay, now this might be a bit of a hot take. I haven't seen too many people talking about this version of Valgavoth because, of course, the other version got a ton of attention during spoiler season, and rightfully so. It's an exciting card. It's got a lot of power behind it as well. But I actually think this Valgavoth, because it's in black, because it's in red, 2 colors that are just going to make it really, really easy to get that third ability going and draw cards basically at will. I think this is a low tier S commander. This is pretty much perfect for most of the themes that Rakdos is known for. It's great for a group slug, obviously, because you could just keep filling your hands filling your hand, and if you find instant speed ways to deal damage to opponents, make them lose that life during each of their turns, then I don't think it's going to be difficult to build around that and do that consistently at least 2 times around the board, maybe 3 times around the board, once you get some sort of a board state set up. So yeah, I think both Valgavoths have gotten some attention. The other, one that we're going to look at in a second, has gotten a lot of attention, and again, rightfully so. But this is an extremely strong commander, and I think it might actually be not just easier to build than the other because it has red involved and group slug is so prevalent in those Rakdos colors, but just more fun to play as well because you're not trying to get to 9 mana. You're not kind of forced into doing a janky reanimation thing to get your commander out. This is a really well-costed commander for all the value it's giving you, and you're going to be able to get a lot of power out of it pretty easily, I think. All right, but that brings us to the other Valgavoth. This is Valgavoth Terror Eater. For 6 generic and 3 black, you get a legendary creature, Elder Demon. It is a 9/9 with flying and lifelink. It's got ward, sacrifice 3 non-land permanents. If a card you didn't control would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. And then during your turn, you may play cards exiled with Valgavoth. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its mana value, rather than pay its mana cost. Alright, now, again, this Valgavoth, of course, got tons of attention whenever it was spoiled. Sort of like Turgid, where the salt from Commander players just kind of started flowing before the card was even printed or widely available. But, 9 mana, that's a lot of mana. Mono black can certainly get there, artifact ramp and all the different ways, even after the recent bannings, which, I purposely have not touched on. But, even after those cards were taken out of the format, it's not that difficult to get to 9 mana, especially if you're not playing CEDH or, a super competitive group of players. Then, you're probably going to get to cast this at least once, and unless a different player can make you sacrifice it somehow, or maybe do a certain type of board wipe, something like that. It is going to be vulnerable to board wipes, but this is just going to be a ridiculous card. It's going to induce a lot of salt. It's obviously an S tier commander. I think even with that cost, it's still an S tier commander, because it just takes casting it one time, and if you can find a way to force your opponent to start targeting Valgavoth, then you just have kind of full reign over what happens with the board, things like that. But just like Turgid, you're going to have fetch lands and lands being sacrificed. There will probably be other just incidental sacrifice going on throughout the game as well. It can't get tokens, but the fact you don't have to pay mana into those cards once you have them, and you can just lose some life. Black has no problem getting life back, and with a 9/9 life linker, that just feeds into the 4th ability really well. So, I think a lot's been said about Valgavoth. It is an S tier commander. It is limited by that mana value. That's a difficult ask to get to 9 mana, even in a casual pod, and then especially to get to 11 or 13, however many times you need to cast it. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But this reputation, or this commander, will get a reputation, and I think that reputation will be well earned, just like Turgid. Alright, next we're going to look at Victor, Valgavoth's Seneschal. I hope I'm saying that correctly. For 1 generic, a white and a black, you get a legendary creature, Human Warlock, and Victor has an Eerie ability. Whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, surveil 2 if this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn. If it's the second time, each opponent discards a card, and if it's the third time, put a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and Victor is a 3/3. Alright, Victor is kind of a difficult card to rank. All of these commanders where you've got to go through hoops and get their abilities to trigger 2 or 3 or sometimes even more times than that. There's definitely a lot of power behind the ability. It's not like any of these different steps are, they don't have value, they don't provide value, because they definitely do. And I do like the way that, obviously the first 2 abilities kind of set up the third ability and give you lots of potential fodder to look at graveyards and things like that. So I think getting to that third step, white and black are good colors to play enchantments. We kind of talked about that already with Master of Keys and some other commanders where Orzhov has those enchantments that you can sacrifice and get into the graveyard. That black has plenty of self-mill and ways to even hunt for specific things to put in your graveyard, like those creatures and things like that. So it won't be impossible to trigger this 3 times in a turn, but I don't think that we're going to see the consistency with Victor that we see with some of these other commanders, where you're just triggering this every time your turn rolls around. And definitely it's going to be difficult to trigger it on opponents' turns. And to do that consistently that's a lot to ask. So there are quite a few flash enchantments in these colors, so that's going to be helpful. Even the new flash enchantment from this set that comes down and can take out a creature with 3 toughness or less, that's obviously going to be a nice inclusion here with Victor, but yeah, I just think this is either a high tier or a high B tier or a low A tier. I could see Victor being in the A tier and kind of proving me wrong here, but I think for now I would say just with the difficulty of getting that third ability to go off consistently, I'm going to put him in B tier. All right, next we have Winter, Cynical Opportunist. For 2 generic, a black and a green, you get a legendary creature, Human Warlock. Winter has Death Touch, is a 2/5. Whenever Winter attacks, mill 3 cards. And then Winter also has Delirium. At the beginning of your end step, you may exile any number of cards from your graveyard with 4 or more card types among them. If you do, put a permanent card from among them onto the battlefield with a finality counter on it. All right, I like Winter a lot. You know, again, there's so many commanders with 3 or 4 lines of text. I think Wizards did do a good job of making sure that for the most part those lines of text are working well together. They're, you know, feeding into each ability and things like that. I like that Winter can, you know, grab any permanent card to put back out. That's a big upgrade over, you know, having to hunt for creatures or enchantments specifically. When you're trying to get Delirium going, you don't have to worry about that so much. You can just kind of load your graveyard with a bunch of different card types and load your deck with those card types as well. Black is a good color to be in for the finality counter part of it because you have those utility creatures and a couple of other options to take the counters off. And I believe with finality counters, once that counter is off, you know, it's just as if you reanimated the creature normally, or whatever permanent you're looking at. But yeah, I think Winter, not as many hoops as it seems to jump through, just because with all of the new card types and things like that, Delirium has gotten not automatic to get online, but fairly easy to get online by, you know, turn 3 or 4 usually. Black and green have tons of self-mill. Green is actually a really nice color to get that mill and then be able to kind of selectively take back whatever you need back into your hand that you've milled. We just saw, you know, I think it's Cash Grab from Bloomburrow, and there's some other cards in green that will just let you mill 3 or 4 cards and then take back a permanent from among them or something like that. So yeah, I think the colors work well here. A 2/5 Death Touch is a decent body. You know, I think you're going to be limited in who you can attack. Kind of toward the mid game, you'll have plenty of opponents that are set up and can kind of eat the Death Touch and block. But yeah, the first time he comes out, he should be able to swing maybe once or twice without having to worry too much about that. So I'm going to put Winter as a low A tier. I think it takes a little bit more work to set up, and actually, I'm going to move Keon down. Keon takes a lot of work. I think that it is an A tier, but it's difficult to get the most out of that ability. But for Winter, yeah, he takes a little bit more work to get set up and get going than some of these other A tier commanders. It's maybe not as straightforward, but the fact that he can put any permanent out from what he's getting from those 4 different card types, that does give him or give Winter just a lot of kind of top end potential. There's a lot of different ways you can take that, and there's a lot of powerful things that you can cheat into play with that ability. So, all right, so now let's look at the other version of Winter. This is Winter Misanthropic Guide. For 1, a black, a red, and a green, you get a legendary creature, Human Warlock. This version of Winter is a 3/4 with Ward 2. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws 2 cards, and then also has a Delirium ability. As long as there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, each opponent's maximum hand size is equal to 7, minus the number of those card types. Oh boy, this Winter. So, you know, I talked about kind of the salt flowing with Valgavoth and how that's going to be a commander that I really think is just like Turgid, is going to feel extremely bad to play against, especially if, you know, the player playing Valgavoth, the 9-drop, is able to get that on the board with lots of sacrifice fodder or, a way to give it indestructible, something like that. And it just kind of sits there on the board. Winter will be a little bit similar in that, once it's on the board, that ward is going to be really important because people will immediately target this. It's just like kind of the old Jin-Gataxias and any of those cards that limit hand size. Even if it's mid-game, later in the game, and it doesn't affect every opponent quite as badly, if they're down to a few cards in hand or something like that, just the presence of this on the board and opponents knowing that they can't draw into a bigger hand or something like that, I think there's probably a psychological component there that kind of drives people to want to remove cards like this as soon as they possibly can. So there's definitely power here, and there's potential to be a really punishing commander because red and black especially can punish people for drawing those cards. But I think Winter is held back, and probably the most powerful out of these B tier commanders that we've seen, but held back by the fact that you're potentially giving 6 or 8 cards to your opponents each upkeep, and then that gives those opponents their turns as well to try and remove Winter and get that benefit without having to suffer through the reduced hand size and things like that. So this is another one I could certainly be proven wrong. It could be that Winter is extremely difficult to remove because of that Ward 2, and because of that, you're able to have Winter stick on the board and have that third ability really punish opponents. But I think for the most part, Winter and the Winter player are going to be getting targeted right away. Alright, so looking at our last 2 commanders here, we have Duskmourn All Questioning for 1 generic, a green and a blue. You get a legendary creature, Human Wizard. She is a 1/1. At the beginning of your end step, if a land entered the battlefield under your control this turn, and you control a prime number of lands, create Primo the Indivisible, a legendary 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token, then put that many +1/+1 counters on it. And then they are nice enough to list the prime numbers here for you, up to 31. So obviously, Duskmourn is extremely unique. Just like a lot of other people, I'm sure, I love the use of prime numbers in her mechanism here. As far as her power level, I think Duskmourn is pretty solid. Green is the perfect color, again, to be able to just have as many lands as you need to trigger her ability, to make sure that you hit each of those prime numbers at the end of your turn each turn. So you will need a way to turn off the legendary rule, or you can look at ways to benefit from the power that your creatures have. It would be nice if we were in red and we could use those fling effects to fling the really, really, really large versions of Primo, kind of at it might be Primo actually, to fling those really large tokens at our opponents. But the other direction that I would take Duskmourn in is just trying to move those counters, preferably at instant speed, to other creatures, and maybe loading up on creatures with evasion, creatures with trample, things like that. I know there's some ways to do that in green, and there's a lot of obviously build-arounds in green for just +1/+1 counters and big creatures with evasion and things like that. So yeah, I think Duskmourn's going to take a lot of work on the deck building side. I think that she is a solid B tier commander, easier to work with than some of the other commanders in B tier, and maybe even in that low A tier, just because for the most part you're trying to ramp out lands as fast as possible, and you're just getting this progressively larger and larger creature to work with. So yeah, fun commander. Again, kind of be on the lookout on the channel, because there's a good chance I'll be putting together a deck tech for this version of Duskmourn. And yeah, looking forward to working with trying to make prime numbers work for you there. All right, and our very last commander here, Duskmourn Mystery Unraveler for 2 generic, a green and a blue. We have a legendary creature, Human Wizard. This Duskmourn is a 3/3. With landfall, whenever a land you control enters, manifest dread if this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn. Otherwise, you may turn a permanent you control face up, and then it's got the reminder text there. So, I think obviously this is going to be an easier build around than the previous Simone. There's enough landfall triggers and enough landfall payoffs in Simic to kind of, I think, bump Simone into the low A tier. Really easy commander to build around. Lots of face down stuff in green and blue. Lots of ways to get value from, that free creature coming out every turn. I don't know that there's a ton of power here, just because, even turning things face up for free, there's only so many payoffs for that are kind of big, bomby additions to the board that are going to swing a game real heavily in your favor. But I like the idea of trying to maybe do a, flash landfall theme where you use those Simic cards and maybe use blue or artifacts to give your green ramp spells flash as well, and just try to get as many of these 2/2 manifested creatures and things on the battlefield that you possibly can. So that's a direction I would take her. I wouldn't necessarily just go for the biggest morph or other mechanics that have their creatures come out face down and try to flip those up. I would try and maybe go a little bit wider than that. And green has tons of ways to close out games once you've gone wide. You have your overrun effects. You've got Craterhoof Behemoth. So, yeah, lots of ways that you could benefit from just loading up the battlefield with those 2/2s. So, as far as power, again, kind of like this other Simone, I think this Simone will be easier to build around, but not at a power level of this other Winter or things like that. So, all right, but that is my breakdown and my tier list here for all the Duskmourn commanders. Let me know what everyone thinks in the comments. I'm sure there's going to be some disagreement. It's a big logjam here in the A and B tiers, but I think that's actually good. That means we have a lot of commanders that are solid to build around, but are not necessarily so powerful that there's not interesting ways to take them and things like that. So, yeah, there's going to be some commander deck techs and things like that coming up on the channel, so keep an eye out on that. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and keep playing Commander.